So for today, basically we're talking about design, and this is really designed to be an overview of the design of applications. I'll try not to overuse the word. Uh, and so basically what do users actually care about? They don't care about blockchain at all. We were talking about this a little bit beforehand. Users don't care, other businesses don't care, nobody actually cares. And so if there's one thing that you'd walk away with, it should be the knowledge that that's the truth. The fundamental truth is that, remember, everything is about the user. It doesn't actually matter what platform we're talking about. It doesn't matter what app we're talking about. They don't care. If they have a problem, they want to get it solved fast and cheap. So why is it worth actually talking about this? Because where we are in the industry right now is we're still very, very early. We're still in the innovators phase. We're still in the phase where people are willing to go through all kinds of difficulty. They all kind of understand the jargon, and it's a time where the only way that we can cross the little mini gap over to early adopters is to begin actually speaking like human beings again, to begin courting people who are actually able to who don't necessarily have to have that level of technical savvy that we've been operating on. So basically, I think you need to really focus on design thinking to begin moving across that gap. Certainly to get to the quote big scary chasm that gets you into the early majority, but we aren't even close to that. I mean, that's years away. The other reason on the human side. So Sarah Baker Mills is the design lead at Consensus, which is the Ethereum product studio and venture studio. And one of the things that she's talked about is that trust is very important, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But basically what she was saying is that this is also important because blockchain in particular is a platform that actually affects some of the most important things about people. One of the reasons why it's so valuable is it's not just a commodity compute platform, but it's a compute platform that actually provides access via primitives to very important things to users, right? Their money, their identity, their data, and their health information. There's a lot of stuff that you can put on the blockchain that we need to be stewards of. And this is even more so in blockchain than most other industries or most other areas. And so that's why this is also really important. So as far as today goes, there's a lot of different scopes that we could talk about when we say design. So I kind of want to kick off, just get everyone on the same page. So user-facing design is sort of what's maybe considered traditional design, right? It's users using your apps. We also, obviously, design is used in a technical context too, because you have technical systems design. And then, in both of these contexts, you have design. We talk about design patterns and things like that. Today is much more about the user-facing side than the technical side. But they're not actually completely separate, especially in something as technical as blockchain, where your user-facing design should actually be informing your technical design, and your technical design should be informing your user-facing design. I mean, it's a feedback cycle. In the end of the day, what's going to win is what the user wants. But obviously, we have to operate within constrained environments that are governed by the technology along the way, and we need the designers to carry the standard and push forward with what the users actually want and to be the voice of those users. So just kind of a note of this is specifically addressing maybe lower level platforms, so less on the dApp side, more on the platform side, but there really are two constituencies for platforms as well. You have the app builders, and then you have the app users. So we talk about, basically there's a difference between developer experience and user experience. And it's great to design for end users. Everyone loves that. Designing for developers is much more challenging. There's a lot more text involved. But it's equally important. There is a talk that I gave a number of weeks ago about developer experience, which is maybe worth checking out if you're interested in that. But for today, we'll stick to the sexy stuff. And specifically, again, talking about end user design with a lot of sort of using kind of in the same way user experience as well. Again, there is a difference, but that's kind of the way that I'm going to be framing things. So what is actually user experience? In the end of the day, it's actually the entire experience of the person who's using the application. And some of the metrics that we tend to use are, is it easy and is it pleasing? Is it fun? Is it enjoyable to use? There's a difference between the interface and the experience. So they often get conflated, UI versus UX. User interface is actually generally just the page or the screen or the thing that you're interacting with in the moment, whereas the experience, again, is an entire journey. So one of the typical examples is that you have a user interface. You have the old Heinz ketchup bottles are optimized for user interface. They're beautiful, they don't work, you tip them upside down, nothing happens, unless you know the trick where you hit the number. And then now they have the new squeeze bottles, which don't look like anything in particular, but they in theory work, unless you've tried to squeeze them really hard and then it all shoots out the bottom and then it doesn't matter anyways. There's also, we talk a lot about usability, and usability is a little bit more, let's call it the science of the science of UX maybe. Again, these terms, I'm going to be kind of using them fast and loose here. Purists will take me to task, but in the end of the day, you can kind of think usability is the science. It's what we put metrics on, we track it. In the end of the day, we want to let the user achieve their goal, with measurable effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. User experience, again, there's this element of joy, this je ne sais quoi that often comes with it that we also want to pay attention to, because if you're only focusing on the tight metrics, sometimes you miss what actually makes apps truly enjoyable to use. So again, UX is in fact the full journey. So as far as the industry today, it's not great. So this tweet was from middle of the year, and it's the user experience is it's hard, and it's not necessarily some of it is technologically constrained, and some of it is designer constrained. There are a lot of technical projects that haven't been prioritizing design. We were talking about the prioritization of design before this, and there's a lot of room to move forward. So for me in particular, especially for today, everything that I'm describing, I didn't make up any of this. This is really relying on a lot of the information that some of the visionaries in the industry have put forward. We have a number of these folks. Ethereum has been big, Consensus has been big, and CoinList have been big. And Sarah Gregory, actually from Coinbase, was with us and maybe a couple months ago, giving a fantastic talk on user experience. So I want to acknowledge that there are some diagrams and things like that as well that I'm going to show that are actually from these folks as well. So just wanted to give them upfront credit for what they've done, and in the end, I'll be encouraging you guys to follow them as well. But in the end of the day, what's kind of cool about this is there's so much white space right now that everybody's trying to figure it out. Nobody has this, nobody's nailed this. There are so many new patterns that we have to walk through, that we have to figure out, that we have to test. The technology is changing so fast that it isn't like this is, all the Medium posts have been written, all the guides have been written, everything's been figured out. It's totally the opposite, and what's cool about that is that everybody's really open to collaboration. So if you're interested in participating in design, or if you're just interested in learning about design, it's a two-sided conversation. It's not people, on the stage talking down. It's very much a collaborative thing. A lot of it takes place on Twitter and on Medium and on the podcasts and at conferences, but it's definitely an open conversation. So just a quick bit about myself. So I run operations at Near Protocol. So Near is a scalable, developer-friendly blockchain. So we're basically kind of doing what Ethereum 2 is attempting to do as well, with a fully sharded system from day one. And we're really focusing, as we are here, on usability as an incredibly important thing to target to begin to cross that little microchasm into the early adoption phase. So what I wanted to cover today is basically just kind of the high level of what is this decentralized app space. Talk about some general principles of design. I won't belabor everything that most of you might be familiar with. Talk about designing on blockchain in particular. As I mentioned, a little bit about designing for trust, and then kind of wrap things up. And then at the end, actually, what I'd like to do is with the folks who are here, is sit down and have a bit of a chat. And you guys are welcome to stick around for sure. So just again, quick benchmarking. What is a regular app? We've all used them. It's an interface. It's a front end that gets served from a server that's usually probably cloud hosted on Amazon or Microsoft or Google Cloud. And it sits on top of a database where the data gets stored. These are all things that we're hopefully well familiar with. And then the question is, what's the difference when you begin to decentralize something? What does it mean to put it on the blockchain? And ultimately, the blockchain still gets access typically through the browser, because this is where the users are. But it takes the typical interactions with the blockchain require some sort of user permissioning, which we'll talk about a little bit, through the wallet. And if it wants to interact with the blockchain, it has to go through the smart contract, which actually lives on the blockchain. So the blockchain is kind of both acting as almost a server and almost a database at the same time. So the other thing I want to note, gave a talk on this one last week, which is basically that decentralization is not pure, or it can be pure, but it doesn't have to be pure. It is a spectrum, and we talk about it very binary, but it's not. It's definitely a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you have the dApps, the true decentralized, decentralize all the things apps, and on the other side you have the centralized. But there's this big middle ground in the middle where really it's just businesses want to use things that work, and they might actually, the best solution might actually be on the blockchain. It might not be on the blockchain. Half the solution might be on the blockchain, half the solution might not. Remember, in the end of the day, users only care about getting their problems solved. They're far less motivated by high, lofty goals of trustlessness and decentralization and things like that, unless it means momentary value. So what actually do you get when you're on a blockchain-based app? So in the end of the day, users, they own their data. That's one of the key fundamental things. It's not in your database, it's on the blockchain, and the blockchain is everybody's database. In order to access that information, we have to ask their permission. And this is one of the biggest bedeviling factors, which we'll talk about. The other one is that actions have costs. So we're not really used to operating in this world where everything actually has a cost to it, where you have to pay for every step that you want to do, right? We're kind of used to the bill me $7 a month, and I'll think about that later. If you've interacted with Amazon, with the Amazon cloud, you're probably used to getting a metered bill that's much more fine-tuned, but still it's not as fine-tuned as this. This is you're actually paying for every single little thing that you do. And then, of course, and oftentimes, and somebody has to pay that, and so oftentimes we end up pushing that up to our users, at least in today's world. But the ideal world is probably that we do something very similar to what we do on Web 2, which is more hide that as much as possible. And then, of course, there are some new interactions and things like that are being experimented with. You have token curated registries. You have staking mechanisms that basically, people put their money where their mouth is to bet on something or to claim something or whatever it is. And governance, voting as a part of the protocol. These are all things that users aren't really used to paying attention to, and we're kind of, as an industry, I think, trying to push them into some of these new patterns, and we'll see what actually becomes successful. But it is a lot of these new patterns are important. But in the end of the day, it's just design. And again, it's first principles are first principles, and they are what they are. So what I want to talk about is specifically some of those things, walking through what the user's experience looks like in a blockchain-based app, and basically what the walls are that those put in front of users that maybe they didn't have in traditional apps. So one of the key ones is knowledge. Almost every decentralized app, DApp, whatever it is that you use, that you'll run into out there, they have some sort of education problem. Users have some kind of knowledge problem, because users go in expecting nothing different. They go to a website, they expect a website, they expect it to, e-commerce sites to operate on the same principles, they expect games to operate on these same freemium principles that they're used to. And we have to actually figure out how do we educate them, how do we on-ramp them to the changes that are about to happen in their experience when we have to actually ask them for permission or do things like that. And what does it mean? And in some of the value propositions of the apps themselves, like I like using the CryptoKitties example because everybody's kind of heard of it. How do you educate people on what it means to own one of these silly cats? What's different? What is actually intrinsically valuable about this thing that they have, which is the core value proposition of the entire app. So no matter what, there's always an education component that's associated with this, and education is really difficult for users because unless they are literally going in asking to be educated, what they really want to do is the thing that they wanted to do. Not that they want to learn as little as possible to get to that thing. And so a lot of apps will provide way too much education, lots of big walls of text and trying to inform the user of all the things that are about to happen all the time. And then on the other side, you have apps that don't really do a good job of that or are optimizing for power users at the expense of new users. So, and it's a really hard ground to straddle. It's very easy to say, choose the right amount of education, but obviously in practice, that's much more difficult. So the next wall that they typically run into is the wallet. And that's a pretty big one. It's almost every blockchain-based app is going to eventually ask the user for their wallet. And typically what they'll do is they'll detect that there's a wallet, or the app will usually need a wallet for one of the activities that they want to create. Usually that involves like creating a user's account or signing a transaction of some sort. And so users need wallets, and this is totally new. This is not something that users are used to. And so the very first thing that you do, I took the screen cap here from one of the popular games. I don't remember what it was called, but it's again the very first thing that a lot of these apps require you to do is to go and download MetaMask, which is a wallet app, and this is a huge wall for lots of these users. The other one is, okay, great, you have a wallet. Now what's inside of it? Usually to interact with one of these apps, you need to have tokens. How the hell do you go out and find tokens? What's a token? This is a huge pain for users. If you've convinced them that they want to use your app enough to download this other app, sometimes this is a reasonably familiar pattern. It's like, sometimes you need to download the Zoom app to use to use video conferencing or something like that, right? We're kind of used to this modality of like, okay, well maybe we have to download something new, but then it's, wait, what do you mean I have to like pay money first to go buy a bunch of tokens, right? This is a huge wall for users. And then managing keys. What does it mean to be a wallet? Well, what's inside my wallet? I have keys. What does it mean? What is a key? And you can kind of, there's a little nugget of something familiar in keep your password secret, but what is a key? What is the difference between a private key and a public key? I mean, I didn't know what it was for a long time. It just didn't seem to make any sense. I had no way of figuring out what the actual difference was. And of course, what happens if you lose your keys? What happens if you have your keys on your iPhone versus your Mac? It's a hugely complicated barrier. And then the fifth wall is permission, is transactions, right? Because okay, so now let's say you have the wallet, you have the tokens, and now the app wants to do something. Well, the app is going to ask you for permission to do it. And a lot of times, actually, the first thing that the app will ask you is can I access not even your wallet, like your balances, but can I access your information? Can I ask like who you are? Which is totally foreign, because we go to the website now and you would just expect that there's a maybe it's been saved in a cookie what your login status is or something, or whatever it is, and so maybe you've logged in with Google before or something like that, and so again all of this permissioning, all of this constant asking. And then of course when you have transactions, when you actually need to do one of these things, whether it's creating an account or again having a transaction happen on the blockchain, you end up having to ask permission for that. So these are all hurdles for users who they don't know what the heck is going on. Like, why do I have to give you permission to do these things? And then gas is a specific subset of these transactions, right? So great, you're asking me for permission. What are all these things that you're throwing at me? What is gas? What is the gas price and the gas limit? And what does it mean to be faster or fast or fastest? This doesn't make any sense. So again, these ideas of gas and speed, which this by the way is a very Ethereum focused lens, but again, I do that just because it's a very common paradigm that people are pretty aware of. Newer blockchains are generally starting to try and figure out how can we reduce users' ability, how can we reduce these deeper, how can we make even developers not think too much about these kinds of things? But this is the world we live in right now. And then of course, the seventh wall, you've gone through all this stuff, you've finally done a thing, and now you have to wait. You have to wait for it to happen. And how long do you even wait? I don't know, I selected fastest, but why am I sitting there with the spinner on the screen just going and going and going? What does it even mean to submit a transaction? Does that mean the thing happened, or does it mean that it's going to happen? Again, this is not a pattern. Users are not used to waiting. So let's figure out how to address these problems and scale the walls. By the way, this is from a book on medieval siege warfare. Methods of attack on the castles of England, if you're curious. So I want to back up a little bit and just kind of start from the top again on design principles before moving back into the blockchain specific stuff. I think again, just to benchmark, people tend to say design thinking and design process are kind of synonymous. Design thinking has become this very buzzwordy sort of enterprisey consultancy thing, but I like to think of it a lot more about just what's your state of mind when you're approaching these problems? Are you actually approaching them in a very deliberate, user-focused manner or not? And then of course you have a process, which is what are you doing to address those problems in a much more tangible way? And finally, you have the toolkit of tactics and patterns and things like that you can access while you're trying to solve these problems. And process matters. So process is actually one of the design thinking is a really I mean, you have to start with the mindset, but once you get through the mindset, the process does matter. And I want to mention that. I mean, I'm a process-focused person, but process also really matters in the sense that if you have a good process, it doesn't let you slack on the things that are actually important, but maybe a little bit less sexy because it's hard. It's hard to go out and talk to people. It's hard to go out and find people. Like how do you find the users that you think are maybe the user personas for the app that you're going to build? Finding them is hard, scheduling them is hard, sitting down in front of them is hard and awkward, and so all of this is super easy, especially for a technical team to just go out and execute, right? And so your job as a designer is to try and maintain the integrity of the process and make sure that you're doing a lot of testing that you're actually doing low fidelity, high iteration stuff, while the cost of that is low, because we all know what the carrying, or hope, we all have a sense of what the carrying cost of a team of half a dozen or a dozen engineers is relative to the amount of time it takes to fire up a bunch of paper mock-ups and get a bunch of people in there for 2 hours to poke through them. And process matters. And again, this is a slide from Sarah's deck, actually, but design, testing, get in front of users. Every single step of the way, you need to present these things to users. You need to present your conclusions, your concepts, your strategies, all the way up through the low fidelity mockups, all the way up to the high mockups, and then build. It's a very different process than what typically happens, especially in this industry, where we've had both the benefit and the downside of most of the early technology is by developers for developers. But again, the next wave is trying to bridge the gap into consumers or businesses and things like that. And you just can't get away with that anymore, because developers might, they're just not the consumer. So who are our users? This is one of my favorite slides. It's from Alex Van de Sande. He gave it at a talk, I think it was in Toronto. But users do not care about Ether. They don't care about backing up private keys, seed phrases, why they can't use standard two-factor authentication, huge hex strings, non-simple usernames, why they can't use their credit card, why they can't use the App Store, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Again, it's just another flavor of users don't care. And there are multiple different types of users as well that we're kind of thinking about that we have to serve. There's the newbie on one side, then there's the hardcore technologist, then there are the decentralized everything folks, and each one of them is going to come in with a very, very different frame of mind. And so, generally it's a good practice to be designing for the newbie first, and then providing some sort of swim lanes where the more advanced users can actually siphon themselves off, maybe turn off certain flows, certain onboarding type stuff, and begin. It's a fairly common practice in product, right, where you have your power users, you begin to you sort of allow them to opt into that process. But the newbies don't care. They don't care, but they also don't know, and that's one of the hardest things to balance. So general design principles, I would expect that everyone's heard about these types of things. On the right, we have Dieter Rams's 10 principles. But in the end of the day, follow expectations. Make sure that the user's expectations are met. And if you can't meet them, make sure that you're setting them as much as possible in the right direction. Minimize cognitive load. Don't make me think. There's a really good book and I think a series of talks around don't make me think. That's one of the fundamental things about users. Don't make them think. Don't make them do anything that requires the brain to turn on, or they will do everything in their power to avoid it, and then they'll act like drunk toddlers. Be consistent, obviously, across your interfaces, and also be consistent with the patterns that they're used to. So, again, Web 2, we still operate in a Web 2 world. We can't build this thing from scratch. Users are coming in with their own frames, and you have to kind of operate within those frames and guide them gently. Don't let them make mistakes is another one. Do whatever you can. Again, we're dealing with sensitive stuff, and it's very easy for users to make mistakes. Do everything in your power to make sure that they can't make those mistakes. And of course, being unobtrusive is one of the hallmarks of design. Light touch. Light touch is worth a lot. So a few things I wanted to actually specifically call out. One of them is the idea of affordances, which was from the Design of Everyday Thing. Actually, I don't know. I don't believe he actually originated the. I don't actually remember what the name of the author of the book was. He didn't originate the concept, but it kind of, I think, because that book was so popular, it kind of took off from him. And then the HCI crew actually extended it beyond what he originally intended it to be. But anyways, in human-computer interaction, an affordance is really considered to be kind of like when you look at something, what do you expect to be able to do with it? So one of the examples that they give is if you walk into a room with a chair and a softball, how do you know which one to do which one to throw and which one to sit on? What that kind of extends to in practical terms, it's a really, really valuable concept because, right, it's how do you design things, how do you design experiences in a way that you're only showing the user things that they kind of know what to do with, or you do your best to show them things in a way that they feel like they know how it works already. Because the more you have to explain to them, the harder it's going to be to get them to actually do something. So one of them is make sure that there's an obvious choice with intuitive results. This is harder than it actually sounds. And then the other is don't let them do something bad. So I guess I can think of a developer example off the top of my head, but there are things like APIs that have really problematic interfaces where they'll sort of expose methods to developers that actually have no business being exposed, and it's like, well, you shouldn't expose them in the first place. And I think that applies in some of these experiences. Like, don't let users do something stupid. It's kind of what it comes down to. Don't let them do things that they shouldn't be able to do. Another one is control and guidance. Users always people want to feel like they're in control. And the way they feel like they're in control is that they know where they are, they know where they can go, and they have a sense of where you want them to go. Right? Those are kind of the three components, and that applies to navigation. That applies to the progress of things that are going on. Like I said, the weighting that'll come up is you will always want to know what status, like what's the status, where am I right now relative to where I could go, and where you want me to go. That's really important, and that actually is one of the concepts that I don't see a lot in a lot of apps right now. Is I think people tend to get a little bit lazy around that because it's in sort of the agile approach, people tend not to put them in stories because they don't really make very sexy stories to have a little progress status bar or a little pop-up notification with network status and things like that. But it's super important because if people feel lost, then they get very unhappy and they leave. Don't make me think we were talking about that. Again, worth it. It's worth like painting on the wall in front of you. So it's great if, and I actually want to emphasize, it's good to be opinionated too. You can be opinionated. Providing users with options to dig deeper is great, but it's okay to pare back the interface. It's okay not to explain every little thing to them. It's okay not to give them all the choices. It's okay to bury some of those choices. Sometimes simplicity is ultimately going to be a better option for you in general than trying to explain everything, which again is pretty contrary to what we see a lot now, because I think people are trying as hard as they can to explain things. So let's move into actual high-level general principles of design are wonderful, but how does that apply to blockchain? So again, we have the wall. Winter is coming, and in April. And so knowledge, wallets, acquiring the crypto, managing the keys, asking people for permission, talking about gas and speed, and then of course waiting around. So the first wall is educational content. Again, how are ways that we can get beyond that? So one of the easiest ones is to educate slowly instead of fast. So it's sort of avoiding the wall of text up in front of people. It's giving them the minimum viable education to get where they need to go without doing anything beyond that. And that helps them, because they're going to click through anything that you put out there anyways. Unobtrusive education is the idea that you're using much smaller snippets instead of explanation. People don't read explanation. They'll read one sentence max. Usually it's just a phrase. And so if you can limit your education to those snippets, it's going to be much more effective. And then optional education is basically the idea that you hide the education as much as possible. Again, if it's not necessary, but something that somebody could feasibly want to know, you bury it in one of those little eye circles, right? So in the picture there, it's basically you kind of have one of those little circles and you hover over it, and then it pops up a little bit more information. So again, it's allowing people to opt into the education as much as possible, while hiding it from them in the critical flow of the application. And then, of course, educating plainly is obvious to say, but hard to do in practice. How can we change these concepts into language that's familiar to them? And we're all trying as hard as we can. It's great to say, really hard to do. So, of course, the second wall is wallets. And if you're a wallet developer, you're going to be paying a lot of attention to this. If you're a dApp developer, you just have to be very aware of what does it look like when your user is moving into and out of a wallet flow. So just a few quick things up front are allow multiple wallets if you can, right? Your users aren't all going to be using MetaMask. Your users aren't all going to be using the default wallet for your app, right? You want to have options that are going to support the proportion of users that are going to make you successful. Engineering resources versus users, always a challenge, but you want to give people options. Priming is something that's actually going to come up a lot. And so this is the idea that when you move into a new flow that a user hasn't seen before, or if you're leaving the garden of your user experience, right? You have control within your app. You don't have control outside the app. For the most part, today's web experiences are all within the app, so you have full control. Crypto experiences are almost inverted in the sense that you have to send the user all over the place before they circle back. The wallet is one of the biggest examples of that. So if your wallet is a web extension, a Chrome extension, for instance, like MetaMask, how do you prime them for what's about to happen? Because if the window just pops up and it says, does the app have permission for that? I mean, that's basically a pop-up. People are trained to avoid pop-ups. People are trained to hate pop-ups. And so what you can do basically, and the example that's here is something that's in an iOS app, which is basically first it's asking the user, would you like to receive notifications from the app? And this is sort of within the flow of the app, and it provides the context on that. And when you click OK, then the system dialog pops up, which says, would you like to enable iOS notifications? And so instead of just dropping you on a page and having the system dialog pop up, you're kind of on-ramping them, and you're getting them to say yes early. So wait is super important. So a lot of apps seem to actually be very aggressive about getting in front of you with a wallet and saying, hey, you need to have a wallet. Hey, you need to have an account. What can you do to actually push that back? What can you do to do as much as possible for the user before they actually have to have a wallet? Because the more value you can provide them ahead of time, obviously the more impetus, the more momentum they're going to have, which is going to keep them going through the pain of going out and finding a wallet. And then, of course, just wanted to note that there are limitations around wallets as well. So again, as part of this idea that you're handing off the user experience to someone else, there are things that you kind of want to do with a wallet. Like you would love to have the wallet pop up and say something nice about your app and from your app that says, hey, don't worry, like we're just here to help, and this transaction is going to do X, Y, Z. But there are some security reasons why they don't allow that. So again, it's just this sort of like, this kind of relatively cold MetaMask style pop-up, which is in front of them. And again, so your users, you just have to be aware that your users are going to have that jarring experience. So as far as acquiring crypto, this one's tricky because this is probably the furthest that your users are going to go away from you, and the least likely that they're going to find their way through it and come back. And we don't really have very good solutions for this. Again, one thing that you can do certainly is you can at least allow multiple currencies. This is super app dependent, but obviously users will have multiple currencies in their wallet. They might have Bitcoin and Ether. They might have Litecoin and Dogecoin. Who knows? And the more that you can do to support them, and this is something that would come up in user testing, in user research. How many coins do you have? Do you have coins? Things like that. Allow multiple. Again, priming comes up, which is pre-clear as much as you can, like give them that on-ramp, let them know that you're about to slingshot them through kind of a weird, difficult experience, which might actually take them a long time. And you have to figure out how do you hook them and snag them and bring them back and give them value. And I don't mean snag them in like a negative way. I mean snag them with something that they want because you're adding them value. And then again, in the bottom is stepping back and saying, do you need this? Do you need crypto? How long can you wait? How much can you push off? How much can you foot the bill, for instance? If you're able to monetize a user later through some other means, the freemium model, right? You can afford to pay for certain user interactions as long as you believe that user's long-term, lifetime value is going to exceed that, right? So right now we're still in this phase where everybody's trying to kind of push all the costs onto the users, and the more that we can get into a phase where we're comfortable taking on costs for the users, knowing that there is going to be a business reason for it later, the more successful that you're going to be in building an experience that users are going to get more value out of along the way before they have to get, again, jarred into this wallet flow. And so sometimes that means footing the bill. And that's not easy because there are security implications to you footing the bill on any of this stuff, because if you aren't careful about the development side, you can have people just DOS your server and basically run down all your balances, and then you have no money left. So there are real things you have to keep track of. But again, like, welcome to the world, right? We're all grown-ups. That's how it works. You have to be careful, but I mean, what matters most is your user's experience. Oh, and then there was a service that I found out about the other day called Wire, which is basically, I think basically what they're trying to do is provide as much of an aggregation of the going out and getting crypto experience as possible. It seemed pretty interesting. So there are people who are converging in on this problem space of trying to create as good of an experience as possible. If you want, you can look them up. I only had a brief bit of time to check them out, but. So people are starting to figure that out, but it's still a hard problem. I mean, it would be wonderful if you just had a pop-up that was just enter your credit card information, at the very least, enter your credit card information and like buy some crypto right now, right? Obviously. And so I think we're trying to get as close as possible, but we're just not there yet. Key management is another difficult one. Hopefully you guys aren't building key management solutions. If you are, I'm sorry. But in general, your trade-off is between design and security in a lot of these cases, which is, your users are going to have to deal with keys, and you want to try and abstract as much as you can away from them. And how do you do that in a way that also makes sure that they're secure, that they're aware of what they're doing? And this is going to be just a fundamental struggle that you're going to have. So analogies are useful. There's an interesting post from IDEO where they're talking about different analogies for the wallet. That's what some of those little icons are. Is a wallet a trophy case? Does it provide kind of a backstop? Is it a spell checker where kind of it would be sort of spell checking people's hashes and things like that? Again, it's just a design pattern. Preventing stupidity, though, is your job. Like, your users will do dumb things. They will try to do every dumb thing that's possible. They'll do deliberately dumb things. They'll do drunk toddler things, and they'll lose their keys. And so everything possible that you can do to make sure that it's just not actually an option for them, the more successful they're going to be. Because as we all know, if one user out of 1,000 has a rotten experience, they're going to torpedo your app with bad reviews and things like that, and it's just going to take you down. So you want to optimize for providing great experiences, but you also want to optimize for minimizing bad experiences. And right now, there's a lot of bad experiences that are landmining out there in crypto. Showing consequences is another one where it's a lot of users come in not knowing what these things are, right? So what does it mean if they have a non-fungible token on their wallet? And leave it up to you guys to figure out how do you educate them with the idea that you should try to minimally educate people. But they're going to wonder when they log in on their computer why they don't have the thing, if they're not super familiar with the fact that wallets are generally local. So you're going to have to figure out how do we show that, and then also how do we show that there's value in that too. So it's consequences on one side, it's the carrot and the stick, but also what the value is of having these individual things. Permissions. So priming. Priming is one of the most useful tools that you have. Again, try to on-ramp them when it's in your experience before, get their consent before, using your words, and then they're much more likely to actually step their way into a successful transition. And then, of course, in any case where there's permissions being asked or things like that, just do the minimum. It's very easy to get developer sloppy, where you kind of permissions equal all, whatever it is. Ultimately, that's going to be a problem. So as much as you can, try to keep the stakes low and try to let the users know when the stakes are low and when the stakes are high. Gas and speed is hard, and we're still trying to figure out what the right patterns are. Again, this is a very Ethereum-centric view of the world, but it sort of applies in a lot of different ways to different chains. In the end of the day, usually the more gas you pay for something, or the more you pay for something, the faster it could get done, or it's both the faster and with the highest likelihood it'll get done. Users aren't really used to that paradigm. They're used to, well, everything is free and it works immediately. It's free, it works, and it works immediately. And so one way that you can do that is actually you could just hide gas. I mean, you could literally just not allow them to enter gas. Like imagine if there was a world where it was just, there was a default amount of gas and it just happened behind the scenes. Maybe that's less realistic for gas, but more realistic for something like speed, where it's like, why do I care? Like, what does this low, average, fast speed actually mean? Maybe try hiding that. Try seeing if users care and making that an optional thing. Hey, would you like to adjust your speed, sort of thing. If it's not necessary, it's not necessary. And then waiting. Waiting icons are becoming an art in this, but they're not enough. One of the key things is any asynchronous process or semi-asynchronous process, don't block the UI. We still do it. We still make the user sit there staring at an icon with no idea how much longer it's supposed to happen. So this goes right back to what I was talking about originally about giving your users control and making them feel like they're in control. Make sure that they always know what the status is of where they are relative to where they should be, relative to where you want them to be. Again, 1, 2, 3. It should be every single page, every single possible path the user has. They should always have those 3 lifelines. And one of those is also showing liveness. That's something that maybe the users are used to, maybe not. You have to figure out how to fit that into the frame that they're expecting. But the worst thing that you can have as a user is sit there and ask yourself that question, like, so did it work? Do I refresh the page? Do I refresh the page is a really dangerous thing for you. So the more that you can do to say, hey, yes, we're working. This is roughly how long we're expecting it to take. It's taken this long. Network's good. We're cool. Like the more that you can make sure the user is comfortable and is able to wait, the better off you're going to be. But even better is don't make them wait at all, right? So if it's an asynchronous thing, figure out how can you get them doing something else, and then circle back. And one of the things CryptoKitties will do, if you're doing a transaction, they'll send you an email when the transaction's ready. It's like, okay, that's pretty good, and it gives you an excuse to get an email from somebody. So especially because you know that they're waiting for value. So there are positives too to kind of all of this, which is framed a little bit negatively around like how do you avoid bad experiences, but you can also create more interaction and more engagement. So designing for trust. And as mentioned, this is something that I don't know if she originated, but I heard of it through Sarah. And the idea is, again, that we are protectors. As designers, we own the experience, and we own the way that people experience this, or the way that people interact with this. And so we have their trust in our hands. We have their data, their identity, their wealth in our hands. And so it's on us to use that responsibility and make sure that they don't make bad decisions, but also that they learn through not making bad decisions, that you don't encourage them to do things like copy paste private keys and stuff like that, because then you're creating bad behavior from users for all sorts of other scenarios, right? As stewards, there are a lot of things that you can do. One of them, for instance, is just acknowledging the consequences of things where possible. It's always a balancing act, security versus ease of experience and things like that. But one of the, I think I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So in terms of someone else named Beltran, he has a long document with principles, which I have linked. I'm not sure if I have it linked in the back of this or online, but if anyone's curious, I can send the link. And basically, a few of the ones that are really useful are permanency. So make sure that users know when things are reversible and when they're not. Again, users are used to the undo button always being there. They will expect the undo button always. They'll expect that if they lose a thing, they can yell at you and you'll give it back. This is how the world works right now. So they need to know. Again, ideally, you figure out how to mask these things the same way we have in today's world. But second best is to make sure that they're darn sure when something is going to be permanent. Another one, of course, is value. Again, it's this idea that make sure that you signal when things are casual, when nothing's at stake, very little's at stake, versus when you have actual value at stake. And privacy. So one of the core tenets, one of the core issues in privacy, and this is, again, kind of on the designers, is correlation risk is real. And so that's basically the idea that if I use data on one app over here, and then I use the same keys on this other app over here, people can see those two transactions on the blockchain. They can link it together, and they can find out who I am. Or even if it's even if it's not literally the same keys, they can actually still use. It takes very few data points to actually correlate somebody's behavior. Literally, you can look at what time of day you log in and what time of day you did certain things, or geography. Two or three of those points, and you have an enormously high likelihood that you found the same person using multiple different accounts. So that's one of actually the really core privacy issues that we have here. And so the more that you can make sure that you're not actually, that you have to kind of think through those things for the user and make sure that ideally they're not possible, so you're allowing them to use multiple keys on multiple apps or things like that. But again, sort of third best is, at the very least, they should be aware of when they're stepping near these landmines and when these things are happening. And that's, again, sort of that design versus ethical security sort of angle, where you just want to make sure, because if they have a bad experience, they're going to blame you, whether it is or is not your fault. And then zooming out a little bit. So a lot of times it's easy to get lost in the minutia of specific interfaces, specific toys, toolboxes, things like that. And I deliberately tried to stay away from tools and toolboxes in this chat. But also it's worth thinking, again, just zoom out a little bit. Sometimes the biggest gains aren't tactical; they're strategic. And what that means is, of course, process. Process is worth it. If you have the right process and the right mindset, you will iterate your way properly in the right direction eventually. And interoperation is something where maybe you can solve some of these issues by interoperating with different applications or contracts or chains or things like that. So you don't always have to do it all yourself. So that's something that nobody else is necessarily going to own, knowing what's out there to solve a given experience problem. So knowing that there's a team in consensus working on a library that actually does the thing that you're kind of trying to do, but maybe a little bit better, it's on you. So that's important to think about. And then, of course, do you even need a token is a really, I mean, that might be number one always, but it's do you need a token for your app? Do you need a token? Do you need to interact with tokens? Is crypto even the right solution? Because in a lot of cases, ask the hard question. We've all been down that idea maze to some degree or another, and bounced away from it. Yeah, so I always rethink the token. So of course, reduce steps, and this is something that's not always easy. But really think hard. How can you reduce steps? How can you delay the hard things for the users as much as possible? How can you make sure that they have value waiting for them? So there's a carrot at the end of the tunnel for all the crap that they're going to have to go through, all the barbed wire they're going to have to wriggle under to get crypto to sign up for a wallet and things like that. So your job is to think, how can we invert some of these paradigms where we're not throwing a bunch of stuff at the user up front? Which is funny because if you're a Web 2 designer, you're like, these are obvious, but then you look at crypto apps and you realize that maybe they're not quite so obvious. And then on the third one, again, it's think outside the box on the business side too, right? Avoid, foot the bill if you can, make sure that the user doesn't have to go through this stuff. And sometimes you magically solve experience problems with you get to throw money at solving experience problems, which actually in the end of the day should ultimately pay off if you've hopefully done the LTV calculation properly. So as far as you guys, so next week we have a workshop. So it's going to be a little bit different. I'll provide some context, but basically we're going to be doing a workshop where you actually get hands-on, you work in small teams, and you solve a design problem. So it's something that we can talk about after this, but one of the easiest ways to get involved is to do something like that, is to actually just get your hands dirty and participate. So come to next week's workshop, that would be awesome. And but more if you're in the digital world a little bit more, there are actually places that you can go where there are design bounties as well. So developers are used to going out and solving people's issues on GitHub and things like that. But designers actually do have options in the crypto space. People are actually putting out bounties for solving design problems, and even doing design research. So I think it was Consensus had, and I think Status, which I think is part of Consensus, had a number of bounties for doing UX research for them. So basically, if you did app teardowns for them and wrote it up in a really nice way, they would give you money. So you can do things like that. You can go on the explorer.bounties.network, and you have things like these design contests or stuff like that. So you can get involved even if you don't know crypto, even if you don't, whatever it is, right? There are ways to get involved. Another one is build an app yourself. Do a tutorial, like just get your hands dirty. It doesn't matter if you're technical. Just you struggling to figure things out and asking silly questions or what you think are silly questions have a ton of value for you understanding and empathizing for your users. Another one is, of course, more macro. There's checking out just Web 2 design systems are quite useful. So you can always go and InVision has a bunch of design systems listed. They have like the IBM design system and things like that. But then again, you can also go into Gitcoin, which is right back in the idea of the last one I was talking about, the Explorer Bounties Network. I don't actually know what it's called, but you can go on this, and they also have these sort of design contests type deals. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do to dip your toes and get ready for it. And then of course follow people. Again, the conversation really takes place in this space on Twitter, on Medium. I mean, really, I'd say Twitter and Medium are the two big ones virtually. Then you have meetups and conferences, and friends of friends emailing things around, and open Google Docs that people are commenting on, and random Telegram groups that are buried 600 groups deep that occasionally surface. I think we've all been there. And three organizations to really take a look at and follow. Definitely Consensus and Coinbase. And then IDEO Collab also is doing work in the design space. So as mentioned in the beginning, it's not over. We haven't solved it. We need your voices. We need your help. I hope you've learned something. Thank you, and we'll sit down for a quick chat here.